Hi, I'm Jade Hernandez. Welcome to GatherVerse News Unscripted, your home for humanity-centered tech journalism. In the last decade, journalism inside of a newsroom has changed. News is gathered and dispersed over social media platforms, catering to audiences demanding more. Real estate is being sold in the metaverse. Interviews are being conducted there. Our virtual selves can begin to explore a place which didn't exist before. So, how in the world could something created in the virtual world but shown in 2D on traditional television capture attention? Well, it helps if you make the cosmic soup with a one of a kind journalist, illustrator, and talent. Call the segments Virtually Rick and air them on Spectrum News 1 in LA. Enter Rick Adams. He taught anyone who watched weekly, no matter what realm you're in, you have to tell a good story for it to resonate with your audience. Rick Adams, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Jade. Thank you. I'm coming live from my sauna. I hope that's okay.
That's absolutely perfect. We would expect nothing less from you, Rick. Let's dig right in. I mentioned the Virtually Rick segments. And I think my first question that everyone will probably want to know is what's the best part of telling stories this way?
Well, it's such a unique way of doing it. And really, I was thrown in at the deep end by the amazing Scott Warren, who was my boss at the time at Spectrum News 1. And he really just threw me into a room he said, look, there's a VR helmet, figure it out. How do we get this on the air? So I love those kind of challenges. And I think what it does do is it brings a kind of depth to the actual storytelling itself. So even though essentially we weren't sort of pumping them out in virtual reality, we were recording them and also using the ability to move around a space in the studio with essentially 3D objects. And so, which sounds like, well, why is that, particularly exciting? Well, it was quite groundbreaking at the time, and I think still is. I think it still hasn't really been done. That kind of depth gives you an ability to really look at a subject and really examine it up close and make it more tactile. And I think it's like a storybook, really. It helps people absorb facts and information much more easily.
Absolutely. And I wanted to give viewers a chance to see Virtually Rick and the best of. So we're going to roll a little YouTube clip. Let's go.
In this Virtually Rick, we look at earthquake-proof buildings. So come with me, let's get virtual. In a major earthquake, most of the damage and loss of life is not caused by the quake, but by the buildings themselves. And when you look at, say, an ordinary high-rise over here, they're basically built to support a vertical load. And if you've ever played a game of Jenga and someone's accidentally bumped into the table, well, then you know what happens next. And buildings aren't basically built to withstand such lateral forces, so the walls buckle and the roof comes down on top. Come with me and we'll find out. We're going back in time as we leap up into the hills, 2017, above Montecito. And if you look beneath this tree, you'll see there's a beautiful array of shrub and bush that's just perfect for the tinder of a wildfire. And as it breaks out, it burns through the chaparral and it creates a huge layer of debris on the surface, as well as burning at an extraordinary high temperature. And what happens there is it changes the chemical makeup of the soil beneath the tree. When the rains came in January in Montecito, they came down thick and fast into this upper layer, and they supersaturated this upper layer here, so much so that the water filled it, and it had nowhere to go because of the hydrophobic layer below, stopping the water from going any further. The result was that when water mixes with soil, of course, it becomes mud, and more rain came, so the layers of mud became thinner and thinner, and because we're up in the hills and gravity takes its effect, this whole layer starts to move, and as it does, it becomes what scientists call a mud flow. It picks up pace and heads down the valley towards Montecito. It becomes a mudslide. There you have it. Mudslides or mud flow can be massively damaging, moving at high speeds across huge distances. How can we prevent disasters like this from happening? Well, it's really a balance of managing our forests while protecting our neighborhoods. And as we Californians know, our relationship with Mother Nature is never going to be easy. And from there, bigger and bigger aircraft can be called upon, right up to what you see here, the Boeing 747 Very Large Air Tanker, which is precisely what it is, able to deliver 24,000 gallons of retardant, the equivalent of dumping a small swimming pool onto a fire whilst flying in low as if on approach for a landing at around 400 feet. Taking on a wildfire is a job for only the bravest and most brilliant. And it's clear to see that with these incredible machines at their disposal, CAL FIRE is ready to do battle with even the wildest of fires. Option 2, remove it completely and return the seabed to its former glory, which is a bit of a cost to the big oil companies. The current estimate for completely decommissioning and removing all of the rigs off the coast of California is around $8 billion. Cutting the rig below the waterline and then leaving it as a vertical structure in place, then placing the top part next to it on the ocean floor. Now it's tricky because it involves divers using cutters, which of course is dangerous. Or number 2, which is tip the whole thing over and leave it on its side underwater. Or 3, sever its moorings from the seafloor and then tow it to a place that's more environmentally friendly. These last 2 methods mean using explosives to sever the jacket legs above or below the floor of the ocean, which means the destruction of the sea life community that's living there. So perhaps that's not the best option. Now, the petroleum companies favour the Rigs to Reef initiative, fuel for electricity generation, heat, and biofuel for cars too.
All I can say is bravo, bravo. When I first watched these, I was reminded that everything that I saw, you created.
Yeah, it's an interesting proposition because you have ultimate control over what imagery is being shown, and it is a storybook. So you really do have to think about the visuals and how do you visualize information, of course, which is quite tricky. But also a great challenge. And for me as an illustrator, I was learning new techniques in how to build things in 3 dimensions, which is quite challenging. But it was also a mixed media prospect. So I was drawing things on my iPad, and my boss was, Scott was like, "It needs to be on the air in 10 minutes. It's going," So I was trying to draw this stuff.
Right.
He was throwing candy at me to keep me going, and it worked.
You've got to have the incentives. So producing, writing, illustrating, and putting it together, but you also are using tools, because I think people saw that you had your VR headset and you're using your tools, because that's, how you made your creations come to life. What tools did you use?
Yeah, so we were using basically that. We were using the usual that you expect, and the headset themselves. I'd have to go away, and we had a little studio where I could build stuff and then bring it on into the set, and then we would have to use this very clever. The engineering team were just totally genius. This guy called Moses and all his gang were trying to basically build this interactive layer that could be seen, that only I could see when I put my headset on. So it was, using the usual stuff, but prosumer, actually consumer stuff, because it was a Google piece of software that Google knew we were using, but we were sort of pulling it apart and trying to make it work. And it was sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the computer would fail. So it was a real frontier experience,
Frontier experience. And you're talking about crews. You mentioned Moses. I mean, putting it all together, you were doing this weekly. So talk a little bit about your timeline from start to finish. One segment.
Yeah, well, we try and do 2 segments a week. I know Scott wanted me to do 3 or 4, but we managed to do two roughly. And the studio-based ones were more complex. We'd have incredible camera operators like Eddie, who was just unbelievable, who could move the rig around these pictures that essentially he couldn't see. But my process was basically starting off with the idea, researching the idea, obviously running it past editorial Scott, making sure that was what they wanted to do, but then going off and basically having interviews with people to get all the facts out, and then trying to boil it down to a 2.5 minute piece, which is always the joke. It's like meaning of life in 2.5 minutes. But so then I then script it, the script approved, then I'd have to take the images, try and figure out the images that I want to put into it. So then I would draw them on the iPad in 2D, and then we would insert them into the 3D world. And now I build 3D things around them to build depth. And it would be in a mini studio where we'd have a sort of a similar setup to what we'd have in the studio, the actual live studio. And then it would be on a computer system. So I'd then transfer the files, sometimes on a USB stick and sometimes just over the drive. And then, yeah, then we'd rehearse and try to make sure it fitted in and that the camera could see it. And sometimes we'd have problems with lights, you know, and the fact that it would be too transparent. So we would shoot the whole thing. To start with, I was kind of a bit of an idiot because I just memorized all the script, and we tried to do it all in one take, and it turned out to be incredibly rewarding but also exhausting and pointless in a sense, because it was like, you know, we need to build in these breaks. So we built breaks in, and it made it much easier, and then it started to flow better, and I started to pick up pace and get more of these, you know, done. And then the results I'd take, and then I would edit myself on Premiere Pro, put together, put some music soundtrack, and then deliver. So it was quite a high wire prospect some weeks, because there would be things like reacting, because we were Spectrum News 1, so we'd be reacting to stories, situations like flooding and also wildfires. We'd have to turn those around really fast. So
you're talking about that. You're talking about that process. Look at the process that you did and the learning process that you had weekly, in addition to news deadlines, because this is something not done. We're talking, this wasn't just a special that you got a month to work on. This was, like you said, reacting to daily news and the daily grind in an actual news setting. And I think that's what sets this apart. You were reaching so many different audiences in different levels and ways, and bringing that, you know, the VR home to folks who may not have even had an Oculus yet, or, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was a super exciting time for me in a way that I could start to really uncover some different skills that I thought I had, but I didn't really realize. And, you know, when you have bosses, you know, a boss like Scott, who's been a unique boss in my life, who's been able to see all of the skills that I have and then throw me at something, that's just where I excel. And you have to have somebody who believes in you, who understands where your limits are, and his belief in me was I had none. So just kept, you know, just keep going.
Exactly. And someone's going to ask your experience. I think that many people will see that you've already pulled in the illustrator, the journalist, you know, memorizing the scripts and hitting the deadlines. But what other experience did you have before tackling something like this, which, as you mentioned before, this was kind of, you were pushing a frontier that had, you know, didn't really have any boundaries, but also didn't have any instructions as well.
Well, you know, my experience, I started off in Nickelodeon Live, and that was in England. And we had a lot of American programming, and they basically said, look, you know, we need to make this interesting because kids aren't watching it. They don't get it. They don't understand it. So I'd have a window of 2 or 3 minutes in between where we had no budget, no nothing. And I'd have to come up with just entertain kids, basically. And so that taught me an immense amount in terms of, you don't need a big budget. You just need wit, intelligence, funny words, and facial expressions, and perhaps some makeup and some other things. But also, you know, that experience, lots of live, really helped me. Illustration really came later. But again, Scott turned up in another form at the Weather Channel, and then threw me at another situation, which was, what would it be like if you just came up with a bit of comedy and weather, but also facts, and also, by the way, we want you to be the first person on the channel to use an iPhone to shoot it and edit it all yourself and do all that kind of stuff. So we were going live on my iPhone. They sent me, you know, him and Jack were sending me stuff, and then I'd have to go live with that. And I think that really taught me an awful lot about how to tell a story very quickly and compactly, you know. And also it gave me a realm of like, well, let's try anything. I just say, what would it be like if we were on an aircraft carrier? How do they forecast weather in the middle of a battle? And Scott would say, go do it. So, but then I'd have to go and film some of that. Sometimes they'd send a camera crew, but generally the level of creativity and innovation I'd have to throw together. And I think that really taught me that, you know.
I think it not only taught you that, but it also gave the audience that it was almost like in real time. They could not only see what was going on, but they could see it in a different way. And you mentioned storytelling, because like the whole point of this was to use technology and put it in a way that could be ingested by so many different audiences. I remember being with my son, and he was like 7, 8 at the time, and he would be walking through as the news was going on, and then he'd see Virtually Rick, the music pop up, and he was automatically pulled in because of the illustrations, because of what he was actually watching. And I think that learning aspect, you must have gotten some feedback, some reaction from these pieces.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you for saying what you said about your son watching it. I mean, that was generally the concept for me was, I've got 2.5 minutes to grab someone's attention and to help learn. I help learning grow, flourish. I'm a big believer in that. And I think, particularly science and facts and truth right now that are all so maligned. It's so important to explain why certain things work. And the reactions I got from people were really, really, really astounding. I got so many great responses from people who just were saying, well, thanks for explaining that, because I never understood it. Even my colleagues during COVID sometimes would say, oh, I didn't get that until you explained it, so thank you for doing that. And I got nominations for Emmys and things, and it was just like, wow, I never thought any of that would happen. It was just so interesting because I was just enjoying my job. And then you get some people who don't want to believe the science, and I did a piece on why does the Earth rotate and all the science behind that. And I got a letter, somebody saying not even the boss of NASA signed off on the heliocentric model of Earth, i.e. don't believe in the Earth being round. So science and explainers don't always have the impact that you want them to have, but they, my philosophy is just show the information, make it interesting and exciting, and allow people's imagination to explode around it.
That's amazing. I think you really did that with those pieces as well. And I think that kind of segues into what you might be working on now, because you're actually taking some of those skills that you used in the storytelling for Virtually Rick, and you're moving them into a different realm.
Yeah, I have to say, I really give Scott a lot of credit for this, because I wouldn't have got back into illustration if it wasn't for him, I don't think, because I wasn't really looking at it as a sort of a way through. And by doing it on a daily basis and getting stuck back into it and realizing I had my own style, it really emboldened me to sort of try something else. And where I'm at right now is I'm developing kids' books and writing and drawing at the same time. And for me, that's so freeing. It's so interesting, but also without such a crazy deadline and without having to sort of turn around stuff so supremely fast. And being a kind of a perfectionist, a recovering perfectionist anyway, I always found the news format immensely frustrating, because I wanted to really explain the meaning of life, but I only had 2.5 minutes, and so yeah, just too quick. So I'm hoping with books as well, and I do believe that kids really need support right now in a lot of areas. And I think I just want to embed, great knowledge, great experience. I'm not saying I'm essentially wise, but I want to be able to give kids amazingly rich stories that they can take with them for the rest of their lives and help build into their lives. And maybe kindness, compassion, those kind of things, understanding, that's what really interests me, because that seems to be at a premium these days. People it doesn't seem to come built in like it used to. So I think manners and experience and kindness and compassion, all of that, I'm kind of trying to work out how to do that.
No, that's what all kids need. Actually, I think every human being needs that, a reminder of that as well. Thank you so much, Rick Adams, twice
Pleasure.
Emmy nominated for his work for Virtually Rick on Spectrum News One. Thank you so much for joining us and informing us on this Friday. We appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Well, what is next for GatherVerse News, you might be asking? Monday's show, of course, we're already working on it. Our very own Priya David Clemens will speak with Dennis Schultz, who runs the Blacks in Technology organization, working to grow the representation of people of African descent in technology around the world. That's Monday at noon on GatherVerse News Unscripted. We hope we will see you there. And of course, I want you to have a safe weekend. We will see you back here next week. I'm Jade Hernandez. See you, everyone. Bye-bye.